Not to be the butt of any jokes, but Stellar Blade has got to be one of the best gaming experiences of the year. A full-figured hack-and-slash adventure with a well-rounded protagonist, which proved to be more than a generous handful when it comes to challenge and scope. I was positively jiggling with excitement when it was first announced. The trailer was certainly very revealing, and now that I've been able to get a good feel for what it has to offer, I can confidently say that the devs were able to squeeze a whole lot of fun out of their premise. Okay, that's the jokes out of the way, it's time for a more serious review.
Great big tits.
It's time for a serious review. It seems like video games and controversy go hand in hand these days, and Stellar Blade was right at the centre of a firestorm when it released a few months back, at a time when Western developers were doing everything in their power to destroy the male gaze by giving their female characters the kind of faces that Eric Stoltz in Mask would probably have turned down. Korean studio Shift Up did the exact opposite and fully embraced it, giving us a protagonist in Eve who wasn't just beautiful, but fully on display throughout the game. The reactions from the soulless, brain-dead corporate NPCs posing as Western game journalists were as predictable as they were idiotic, and probably fueled the success of this game when playing and streaming it became kind of an act of rebellion. And if there's one thing that gamers love, it's rebelling against prissy, puritanical, moral busybodies. The unfortunate downside of all this is that the controversy around Stellar Blade tended to overshadow the game itself as a piece of entertainment, but now that it's a few months down the line and the dust has largely settled, I figured it would be a good time to review the game from a more neutral perspective. You play as Eve, a member of the elite 7th Airborne Squad that's been tasked with reclaiming Earth from monstrous life forms known as the Naytiba that overran the planet and almost wiped out the entire human race decades earlier. The assault goes about as well as the invasion of Klendathu and Starship Troopers, and pretty soon, Eve's the only member of her squad left alive. From here on out, it's your job to battle your way through the devastated wasteland of Old Earth, battling Naytibas and recruiting allies along the way as you search for a way to defeat the enemy once and for all, so that humanity can finally reclaim their home. But all is not what it seems. Not everyone who claims to be on your side is actually acting in your best interests, and the further you progress towards your objective, the more you learn about the true origins of the Naytibas and the mysterious Mother Sphere who sent you on this mission in the first place. In terms of story and characters, there's not an awful lot I can comment on here. The central plotline about Eve's journey to defeat the Naytiba is serviceable enough to keep you moving towards the next objective, and to be fair, there's some pretty interesting revelations towards the end that put the whole storyline into a different context. The only issue is that it's not terribly well fleshed out. You're given only the bare bones of a plot with minimal cutscenes, and character interactions and dialogue are too limited to get you super invested in what's happening, or to whom. There's a ton of text logs scattered around the map that shed a bit more light on individual stories and help a bit more with the world building, but again, reading pages of text isn't the most gripping way to engage with a world like this. That's not to say that I want to be slogging through hour-long cutscenes or anything, it's just that the game could have been a little more efficient in how it depicts the world of Stellar Blades. There's three main characters along for the ride in this story. Adam, a scavenger from the wasteland who becomes a reluctant ally when your goals align. Lily, a survivor of a previous airborne mission who now acts as tech support. And Eve, the leading lady herself, sporting the world's least practical combat outfit. I love how honest the devs were about this one, that you're going to spend the bulk of the game staring at Eve's arse, so it might as well be a pleasant experience. Out of the three, Lily's probably the closest to having an actual personality. Adam's a complete block of wood who doesn't give much away, while Eve's so polite and agreeable that it actually started to mess with my head at certain points. Like, she's a cybernetically enhanced death machine with the personality of a mild-mannered primary school teacher. And as hard as I try, I just can't quite get those two things to marry up in my mind. I mean, don't get me wrong, she's definitely likeable enough, helped by some excellent voice acting, and Jesus, you can tell the game was made by an Eastern developer because she's not some abrasive, embittered Karen constantly trying to prove that she's better than everyone else. But let's be real here, you don't play a game like Stellar Blade for the story. The real meat of the experience is in the exploration and combat, the moment-to-moment gameplay loop. So what's it actually like? Well, pretty fucking good as it happens. Combat mostly revolves around hand-to-hand fighting. Yeah, you do get a gun later in the game, but its effectiveness is as limited as its ammo, so the bulk of the fighting is done with your swords. You've got a big old blade and plenty of different ways to to use it, and the game encourages you to try out different tactics to find the one that suits you best. Heavy attacks deal more damage, but they're slower and leave you vulnerable to enemy counters. There's plenty of combos and special offensive moves you can deploy when you've built up enough energy, and it's a neat way of interrupting enemy attacks. There's also a pretty extensive customization system that allows you to trade experience points to develop your attack, defense, or special skills depending on your playstyle. You can also swap out exospines to give EVA boost in certain areas. It's all standard stuff for a game like this, but it's pretty intuitive and never becomes tedious or overwhelming. There's also a parry and dodge mechanic, and believe me, you'll need to become proficient at both if you want to progress through this one. Enemies hit pretty hard, especially during boss battles, so you need to learn their attack patterns and anticipate their moves. Get impatient and go all out on the attack, and you'll soon find yourself staring at the game over screen. The difficulty level is pitched just about right for filthy casuals like me, providing enough of a challenge to make you work for it, but rarely feeling unfair or frustrating, except during the fucking Raven fight, which takes forever and can basically nuke your entire health bar if you mess up a single combo. I mean, I'm all for a challenge, but at certain points it becomes less about skill and tactics and more about slowly chipping away at her health and praying that you don't make any mistakes. Like I say though, the slightly more forgiving difficulty curve makes Stellar Blade way more accessible than something like Elden Ring, so it's probably ideal for players that don't have the time to grind their way through the latter game. Graphically, I've got no complaints. I don't think this game was done on a huge budget, and you can tell where it doesn't quite match up with the best of AAA gaming over here in the West, but for the most part I think it looks pretty nice, and some of the environments are genuinely gorgeous to look at. I will say though that the controls, which are ideally pitched for fast and agile combat, can become a real pain in the arse during exploration segments. Eve's got this weird habit of continuing on for a couple of steps after you tell her to stop moving, which is fine when you're running around some big arena trying to avoid getting crushed by a giant monster, but a bit of a fucking nightmare when you're doing a platform segment that demands precise jumps and placement. There's nothing quite like falling to your death for the 5th time in a row because your character literally won't do what you tell them to. There's also an open world aspect to the game, allowing you to take on different side quests, level up by battling optional enemies, and just learn a bit more about the environment as you go. Being totally honest, it's not the most interesting or rewarding experience I've seen in games like this. Say what you want about the Horizon series, but they were absolutely rich in environmental storytelling, backstory, interesting game worlds, and challenging dungeons to explore. And Stellar Blade, despite some very nice environments at times, feels pretty shallow in comparison. All of this is to say that while the game definitely could have provided a richer and more compelling narrative experience with its characters and story, the core gameplay mechanics and those all-important moment-to-moment encounters are generally fun and challenging enough to compensate for it. And I love the fact that this isn't a game by some mega studio with hundreds of millions of dollars behind it. It was probably done with fairly limited resources, by a core team of people who were clearly passionate about what they were doing, instead of wannabe political activists forced into the gaming industry as a distant second option. Stellar Blade represents what gaming used to be: fun, irreverent, challenging, and not entirely unpleasant on the eye. And while it might not be perfect, it's a game that provided me with dozens of hours of entertainment. And if you haven't tried it yet, then I'm pretty sure it'll do the same for you.
Tits.
Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.